Did you say something to her?
Look, I know how to talk to people.
And perhaps after today, you will too. Hey Sopranos fans, welcome to another episode here on Bully Whispers, and we are here today to discuss Law 24 of Robert Greene's 48 Laws of Power, Play the Perfect Courtier in the TV show The Sopranos. Now, this chapter is different from most of the others in that while they usually have one or two main themes backed up by a handful of examples, this chapter is pretty much a long list of do's and don'ts, followed by just as long a list of historical examples, which would make it impossible to go in depth on all of them without this episode being an hour long. So instead, we will evaluate Law 24 in The Sopranos by first taking a second to establish what court culture is and the purpose behind it, before moving on to the do's and don'ts of navigating this setup, where we will run into too many characters to spout off here, but Tony, Sil, and Paulie Walnuts will be making multiple appearances, with Professor Livia popping up throughout. You see, many people think of court culture as a thing of the past, but to paraphrase the Machiavelli quote that Greene references, people are all the same as they've always been. Court culture may not be as extreme as it once was. For example, a 19th century traveler to the court of Darfur reported that all courtiers were expected to do whatever the Sultan did, including injuring themselves in a similar fashion as the Sultan were he to injure himself. However, some degree of flattery through mimicry is still present today.
First thing I'm doing is getting wings in my hair. You know, like Paulie.
Which we can see in both directions through the relationship between Paulie and Tony. Paulie is older than Tony, came up under Johnny Boy, and was naturally a fairly large presence in Tony's life from a very young age.
You know, I remember you around that time. When I was bad, my dad used to threaten me he was going to get Uncle Paulie to come get me.
He grew up with a tremendous amount of respect for Paulie and viewed him as somewhat of an authority figure, perhaps even a role model, and ends up getting the exact same tattoo as Paulie in an instance of permanent mimicry. Later on, when Tony becomes the authority figure, we see Paulie sucking up to Tony in many ways, including the aforementioned mimicry.
Nah, we're gonna go with Green Grove. Based on your recommendation, Tom.
I never recommended.
It is a fact of human nature that a structure of court society forms itself around power, and regardless of the methods used, its function remains the same: to provide the ruler with a microcosmic world in which everyone must struggle to please him.
Come on, Tony, you just have a bunch of flunkies.
What do you know about it?
They compliment you on your new shoes. They tell you that you're not going bald. You think they really care? You're the boss. They're scared of you. They have to kiss your ass.
Of course, Tony eventually realizes that Carmela is right, but that's a point we will circle back to towards the end. So, how does one navigate this social labyrinth in their quest to climb the ladder? Well, the first step is to be noticed, but since it's dangerous to display yourself brazenly or arrogantly,
I'm one of the baddest motherfuckers of all time. One of the best singers, one of the best looking motherfuckers you've ever seen. Hold my drink, bitch.
Your best bet is to focus on how you look, particularly your clothing.
Ooh, I like your shoes, Larry boy.
This falls along the lines of dress for the job you want, not the job you have, but I'm not so sure how literally you can take that. You see, I've always wanted to be a Chippendales dancer, but when I showed up to the steakhouse for my bartending shift rocking a banana hammock, they were not having it. My problem was that I didn't follow one of Greene's other steps, which he borrowed from Machiavelli. You must fit into the spirit of the time and place.
Yeah, it's like permanently 1987 in here.
Now in The Prince, Machiavelli opens this concept up to go in many directions, but Greene focuses almost entirely upon fashion for this small part, so we will as well. You must keep your style current, and if you do wear an older style, it must be from far back enough to evoke some sense of nostalgia.
Not really. Casino, we like Sharon Stone, 70s clothes, pills.
If you pick a style that's old, but not old enough, you'll just become the butt of everyone's jokes.
Look at this guy. Members only? How long you been wearing that?
Now that we're past the fashion part, and assuming you've been noticed, it's important to remember that you can't talk to everyone the same way.
Tony wants you.
And you, sir.
Yeah, T.
Tony.
Here, Matt Bevilacqua attempts to talk to Tony like he's a friend, but Tony quickly corrects it. This instance connects closely to another one of Greene's don'ts: never try to become friends with the boss. They don't want a friend, they want a subordinate. Now, this is an interesting one to look at in the context of the entire New Jersey mob, since they're all pretending to be friends, but the difference in status between those two made Matt Bevilacqua's action irksome to Tony. In the same vein as not trying to put yourself on the same level of those above you is another one of Greene's don'ts: avoid being ostentatious or just talking about yourself too much in general. Ralph Cifaretto is probably the best example on the show of someone who is constantly and aggressively braggadocious, which clearly rubs everyone else like Valentina with a cheese grater. Even talking about your own interests too much in a non-bragging way can irritate people, as Paulie does to Tony.
Like every Christmas, he sends out these typed reports of what his nieces and nephews have been doing. Who got into West Point? Who got a hole-in-one?
And since we're on the subject of what not to talk about, never make jokes about appearance. Appearance is a very sensitive subject, and jokes can quickly cause tension.
Boy, are you fat.
What'd you say?
Greene goes further in saying, don't even try it when they aren't around, because you will just be digging your own grave.
You didn't hear the joke about Ginny? Never mind. Let it die at that.
What joke?
John, you're better off not hearing it. Trust me.
Fuck that. I demand you tell me, Paulie.
Of course, Ralphie didn't end up getting killed over the joke, or even by Johnny Sack, but it is interesting to note how, despite everything he had done and the reasons for his death, it was an indirect joke about Tony's weight that broke the camel's back.
What are you, a vegetarian? You eat beef and sausage by the fucking carload.
Now, as much as you want to avoid insulting people like that, it's also important to be frugal with your flattery.
She believed that wildflowers blossom best among the rocks, with little water.
While some degree of flattery is to be expected, too much of a good thing makes it lose value, which we see again with Paulie as he is usually sucking up to Tony. Another thing to be frugal with is your asking of favors. Learn how to ask for them rarely, when to stop.
The money I give you. You're driving a Cadillac and you're looking for more? Shut the whole plane.
And most importantly, never ask for a favor for someone else, especially a friend.
This friend of mine was moving a little X at the club before you took over, and the other night he got thrown out on his ass.
And?
No. I wanted to ask you, as a favor to me, let him keep a little action going on.
Another thing that Greene says never to do is to be the bearer of bad news. Now, this is something that we never see taken to the extreme in this series consistently, but we do see it play out quite a bit when it comes to people not being entirely forthcoming with Tony in terms of bad financial news.
The councilman. What the fuck happened to that?
It petered out.
It petered out.
It died on the vine.
It died on the vine.
In the same vein as never being the bearer of bad news, although on a much broader scale, you never want to be the court cynic. All you will do is irritate people.
We suffered for years under the yoke of that woman. Years! She estranged us from our own daughter. Ruined I don't know how many goddamn Christmases. I don't want to even begin to count.
Instead, be a source of pleasure and people will gravitate towards you, which we see through Tony throughout the course of the series. At the beginning of the series, and even before it started, according to Christopher and Tony B., Tony was the funnest guy in the world, which is a side of him that we can see clearly through the first few seasons. However, by the end of the series, when Tony is in a darker place and isn't as fun as he once was, we see the tensions rising against him from within his own family. The next 2 points this brings us to are first, usually Syl's strength, although not this time, and second, Syl's weakness. First, never directly criticize your boss. Do it in an indirect manner. 2,000 years ago, Chinese scholars compiled a written history of all the dynasties, which included a chapter called Unusual Events, which listed things such as dragon sightings and geese flying backwards. This wasn't because that's what they thought happened. It's because they couldn't criticize the emperor directly. Instead, they hinted at it indirectly through analogies.
And the son goes to the father, Dad, why don't we run down there and fuck one of these cows? Now, you remember what the father said? The father says, son, why don't we walk down there and fuck them all?
Because coming right out and being blunt about it might anger him.
You don't want to bow down. You told him to go fuck himself, which, to be honest, wasn't exactly appropriate, considering.
Oh, is that right?
With all due respect.
What the fuck do you know what goes on in my head?
The next point, which proved to be Syl's weakness when he was the boss while Tony was in the hospital, is always practice nonchalance. Never let them see you sweat or toil. What you do must appear easy for you so that you come off as a genius rather than a workaholic. Even if he hadn't had to go to the hospital, it was obvious that the job was too much for Syl, and let me know if you disagree, but had Tony died, I don't think Syl would have stayed boss for very long. Lastly, we get to the final 2 points, both of which would be necessary to complete the entire list. First, you must be able to master your emotions.
Leave me alone, please. Open the window and just push me out. I can't take this anymore.
Which means being able to laugh and cry on command.
Still, I gotta be the sad clown. For my friends, my family.
Second, you must be self-observant. You have to be able to accurately assess yourself because you can't always trust others to do so. Now, this is one that nobody on the show is particularly good at, except, interestingly enough, Livia.
I know when I'm not wanted.
Despite being one of the worst offenders for most of this list, she is remarkably accurate here. Of course, the reason behind this is pretty circular. She is so cynical that she thinks everyone hates her, and she's right. They do hate her, because she's so cynical. Even Tony doesn't truly accept the nature of his supposed group of friends until Carmela pointed it out. Well, thanks for watching this episode here on Bully Whispers. As always, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you at the next score.